Hello there, and welcome to a new build guide for Age of Wonders 4. In this one, I want to introduce Golem build for the Reavers. This is a very swarmy, very offensive build that is extremely good at just flinging tons of units at your enemy and just overwhelming them by sheer force in the early game, and in the mid and late stage of the game your buff cascade will be so powerful that the enemy will have a more and more hard time in killing off your front line while they're being pelted from your back line. So we're gonna get started as usual with the racial and cultural traits here. So I went for a combination like this. Since my units are actually really only the supporters for the golems, because 90% of my army, or 80%, depends on the situation, will be composed out of golems, most of these traits won't apply. So these are only for the supporters. That's why I went for light-footed, so my support units slash backliners will never hinder my frontliners. Quick reflexes, so they are harder to nuke, and sharp eyes, so we have a larger vision field here. There's a lot of ways you can build this, especially since this build has a lot of freedom. I don't know if this is the actual optimal or best choice. I only know that I enjoyed playing around with this a lot, but let me know in the comment section what you would like for that one. Cultural trait-wise, I went for mana channelers, because that is one really powerful and important step in your build, because you want to spam so many units, and this makes it that much easier. End of the story. There's really not much more to say about that. And Runesmiths goes into a similar venue. First of all, you enjoy an extra polearm unit in your at your disposal early on, but mostly, of course, we go for the cheaper unlocks and the cheaper upkeep on the unit enchantments, because we are swarmers, we want to spend our mana mostly, so that's one thing to pay attention to. There's, of course, other options you can take here. I just went for this combo because it has a really good longevity and a good start. Mana Channelers allows you to pull out units really early on without breaking too much of a sweat, and Runesmiths makes it quite easy to keep up the pace with that and keep the very important unit enchantments rolling. Okay, next step, talk about the tomes. And here we play a extremely materium heavy build. So I start out with enchantment because that yields us very important spells. Copper golems, they are the backbone of your army. They can be evolved into bronze golems, where they turn into a real powerhouse from a point of view where they started off. And we got Sundering Blades, which is also very important, because this makes it happen that over the course of the time you just mash down your enemy by destroying his defenses. And Seeker Arrows is also very nice for this build, because it allows us to make the mage locks a little bit more useful, but this is really only a side guest in this build. This is not as important as it is in other builds, where mostly after Sundering Blades, Copper Golems, and later down the road the spell Tempered Shields will become really useful for your Iron Golems. We gain access to a little bit of an extra mana producer for quarries, which is pretty cool. The extra draft here isn't bad either, and it's unit deployment location, so it's a good late game build. And Sundering Strikes is just Sundering Blades for your heroes. The second tome I picked up is Tome of Zeal. Several reasons are speaking for that. Legion of Zeal is amazing for this build because it gives pretty much all of your roster extra spirit damage and doubled up against condemned enemies. So this acts as a soft booster for your damage. Inspiring Chant is outright amazing, even though your golems don't pick up the morale bonus. +2 strengthen means you can just boost your damage by 20%, and this is pretty powerful because the zeal is on everybody that you have on the melee line. So this is a very powerful, cheap steroid, which is important because our casting power is limited with this build. Zealots are amazing in themselves because they are, again, a spammable unit, and they can apply Condemned. Condemned is really cool for a Reaver build, because the lowered status resistance makes it easier to immobilize your enemies with Harriers, and this makes it easier to subdue them. So Condemnation is therefore a pretty powerful spell to utilize here, and Fanatical Workforce, well, I didn't use it because it doesn't fit too well into the Reaver game plan, in all honesty. So we gain here another quarry building, but the Circle of Zealotry was something that I didn't use in comparison to the Runecarver's camp. So, Tier 2 tomes. I ended up choosing the Tome of the Construct first, but in hindsight, Tome of Artificing is also a very, very valid choice as the first Tier 2 tome. I would actually recommend this one more, because you gain a 30% crit hit chance from this thing on. This is really powerful, because this is a point where your damage profile is increasing a lot. The trick of how we're dealing damage, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the unit roster, but it's important to notice that marking is again 10% extra damage. So we're boosting our damage via strengthening and via critical hits and via marking the enemy. The Iron Golems are therefore an important backbone, because at this point you are able to recruit strong units that can keep your entire roster safe. They are basically the missing link that you need to shove between your spearmen in front and your backline and behind that, because otherwise you are really easy to nuke. They are very, very important and valuable in this build. Siege Magic, I love it because it makes your supporters a lot more useful, and we rely a lot on supporters here. This is more powerful than it looks like, especially since Reavers love to conquer cities. This is really, really good. Artisan Fortification and Bolt Repeaters, oh well, much to say about them. They're useful if you want to research them, but I mostly skip them. Golem Mine is a nice thing to have. Gold is important for this build. It's a very gold-hungry build, and therefore it's good, especially since it boosts up your own defenses. So here with Golem Assistant, we have the first really interesting skill, because it gives you a throwaway unit at the beginning of the combat. This is amazing. Every hero is it's recommendable to have that for every hero. Tome of the Construct gives you then more options, and you see I have researched everything, because everything in this book is really worth your effort. Linked Mines will allow your racial units to benefit from cascading command defend, which is basically a really nice way of boosting your defenses, but this is, I don't use this too much, although the extra retaliation attacks smack. Reposition is what I really, really love, because this allows you to hasten your units just in a blink of an eye, and you just get a strengthen bonus on that. And due to the fact that we only play constructs and linked mine people, this is full-on benefit. And compounding defense, shield and polearm units are the meat and bone of your army, and yeah, it's just a nice to have thing. And Bronze Golem allows you also to recruit these guys at the city. Worker Construct Nexus is really cool in everything it does. It's always worth to pump out one over the course of the time. But Experienced Warsmith is what I wanted to point my finger at this tome. This regeneration is strong. Also the +1 defense, but golems are already hard to scratch in the melee department now. I really admire this extra regeneration, because this makes your army so much more versatile. I really, really like this. After that, we stay with Materium. This is a very, very Materium-heavy build. I think in Tier 1, I just want to mention it here real quick, it is a worthy option to point out, but it diluted the Golem strategy too much for me. Tome of Evolution is also pretty nice, because it boosts evolving units so much, and a lot of your units are Copper Golems, so. But I figured it wasn't as powerful as the Materium alternatives. Because now, at Tier 3, you are dominating. At Tier 2, with your brain, it's easy to work it out, to topple over almost everything. I play tested this as usual on Brutal, and I had no difficulties once I had my first Tier 2 tome unlocked. So, Transmutation is the first one. War Dreadnought, it's hard to point out. It really depends on your situation. If you have to control your enemies a lot, and if you're struggling with a lot of burst damage, or, well, mostly mobile enemies, the transmuters in here come in handy because they have an AoE stun. They're very costly, but the AoE stun of these guys is very, very powerful. Melt armor allows you to soften up your enemies while blasting them, also very powerful pick. And adaptive armor in steel skin just gives you a little bit more of extra defense, although steel skin, again, doesn't apply on your golems, so adaptive armor is the real thing you are after. Transmute resources is rarely used by me, but it's actually really powerful because it does give you a lot of benefit. You sacrifice 75% of the mana income, but you triple that. You get the 75% back as gold production and food, so you basically get a lot of return out of that. Here, there is not that much to say, except for the transmutation circle is really, really cool. It's pretty straightforward. The Tome of the Dreadnought is the real new thing that we're utilizing here, and it really puts the finishing dot on the Golem strategy due to two things. Warding metals gives your constructs the warded ability, which is just the point where your only weakness is growing ever smaller, because the strongest way to beat golems is to burst them down with magical damage. +3 resistance, you really feel that. And tuning kits allows your supporters then to overcharge your golems, which is really, really brutal because you can turn a tier 1 copper golem into a killing machine with that thing without even worrying too much about that. The Ironclad as a mechanical unit also falls into your bigger picture. It is a pretty nice ranged unit. We're not that strong in the ranged department, but it's really nice to have them because they just fit into the build so well. The Great Bombard is a really amazing siege unit, and Pinning Barrage and the Destabilized Mana Core are really good. Pinning Barrage is just a wider nuke than the Reaver one we already got, and the Destabilized Mana Core is amazing for this build because you have a heck of a solid front line. If you sit somewhere, you can pin down your enemy really well, and you don't even need to immobilize them too much to get a lot of benefit out of that one. I really appreciate this thing so much for this build. War Foundry, I rarely use it, but it is powerful, but we don't need a draft too badly. But if you hit the point where you need to print out bigger armies in your cities, that's a really, really good thing because you will have a lot of quarries and mines in this build after all. Artillerist, yeah, pick it up for your heroes. It's warfare, therefore it's a little bit more difficult to pick up. I rarely skill up warfare heroes, but it's really amazing if you pick it up. Nukes, it's just nice. Tier 4, we go for Golden Realm. Obviously, the Gold Golem is the pinnacle of our Golem development. It's where you get the ability to stun enemies in a 3-hex radius with Strike Gold, which is brutal. I mean, the whole Gold Golem is so amazingly brutal. I mean, this guy is just... I don't think I need to say much about him. He's just the best golem out there. And the other options here help the Reavers so much as well. Luxury markets is really, really cool if you already have a lot of gold, but this will come in over the course of the time because gold touched makes your cities more productive, your units more resistant against magic damage again, boosting up your nuke resistance. And Gilding Blast gives you a 1-hex radius stun spell, and Reagent Refinery is a really, really nice thing. It is yielding money, and if you have magic materials, it's really boosting the city really, really nicely. Speaking about money, you also get a lot of money out of the Bazaar of Wonders. The entire Golden Realm book is a lot of about gold, so if you make it here, you can really, you never need to worry about gold anymore. And the Tome of Severing is the last one we're going to pick up. Again, it yields another golem, which is really, really brutal because he is capable of doing condition management for you. You can strip off negative statuses of your units, and he's going to be strengthened, and he can also disrupt enemies. Disruption disables enemy enchantments. It's a really, really good thing, and we get it on every one of our melee units, which makes it really, really powerful. So at this point, your units will be resilient. Very, very resilient. Even if the enemy would disrupt your own units, you still have golems which are robust. They are resilient against damage over time, mind control, all manner of nasty things can't hurt you. And I really like this combination. It's stupidly powerful. Null Shield gives the ability to your shield units to go for status resistance, which is really cool for the late game. Gives a really cool power up for your Iron Golems. And Final Banishment is a real nice burst heal, because it just is a mid-combat burst heal, destroying all the corpses and giving you a little bit of resistance and temp HP. Really cool. And Astral Severance just can't outright destroy magic units. This is really cool, although in my experience it is very situational nevertheless. And free Spelljammers, hell yeah, it's not that useful though. Master of Disruption is the one spell you should have on any warfare hero that is utilizing that, because disruption is really, really powerful. And after that, only the Tome of the Creator awaits. So that's that. Straightforward build, and the only thing I want to say about this tome selection is, since this is a theme build, it is not as performant as other builds that I create usually. It's not as optimized on performance, it's more a theme optimized on performance, rather a build that is purely going for the best performance. That's something I need to say. But like I said, I went through brutal difficulty. It's time now to talk about your roster. Harriers and Mercenaries are your early game units. They make a really, really brutal, strong entrance into the game, but they will be replaced over the course of time. Especially the Mercenary is just not necessary later down the road. Drive back is really nice to have, but our playstyle is more like fortifying yourselves with Spearman front, shields in the middle, and the rest on the backline. The Mercenaries are better for a more agile and less organized playstyle, so it doesn't hurt you too much to lose drive back, believe me. The Harriers, nevertheless, they serve a purpose through all stages of the game, so it really pays off to have, like, in a 3-banner stack, 3 to 4 of these guys. Never hurt you. They're cheap, and their cast net spell is amazing, and their damage stays relevant due to the fact that they're skirmishers, and they're just exploding quite quickly. But the later the game, the less Harriers. That's my personal way to go, because the immobilization of theirs is not too important later, but it's really powerful early on. Now, tier 2, we get the Mage Locks and the Overseers. So this is really your backbone of your army. The Overseers are the most important part because they can blind the enemy, disabling their ability to retaliate, which makes an amazing entrance for every spear carrier, and they can also mark the enemy, which is increasing the damage by 10%. You can inherit that on your golems, and you should do that as quick as possible, of course. The Mage Locks are amazing supporters because they can increase the damage on somebody, and they can just sit there in the backline and burst people. This is really good, especially since they have the piercing trait. Their damage will always be relevant, no matter how heavily armored the target, no matter the fact that we haven't had too many boosts in this build. They will be able to deal damage, especially since if something has to die, we're going to mark it anyways, because we want to increase damage on our golems, so these guys will have an easy time to hit. It's a really nice synergy, and I was surprised how well the Mage Locks perform in a golem build. It's amazing. They're just damn squishy. And the Overseer Subdue, we won't be using that too much, but if you can get in a shot of Condemnation, a immobilization from the Harrier, you can easily take out an enemy for the remainder of the battle. It's really important to stress out that this is a disable, a big one. It's a 90% chance to do that, and if the enemy has a high resistance, use Condemnation. It really helps out a lot here. And their burst heal is really important for your build. I recommend to have at least 3 Overseers, so that's 1 per banner, with a bias to have more of these. Bronze Golems, they cannot be summoned, so that's a little bit of a problem, but this is the point where you can just print out these guys. They are really amazing, especially since they have a really strong suit against ranged attackers that attack you with bows. But again, they have a really hard time against magic attackers, but that's true for all of the golems. Like I said in the tome section, you're working against that though. The Weakening Cleave is an active that is really powerful, especially since it is a cone attack that also debuffs the enemy, but their basic attack is also really amazing. It's also worth noting, that's something that is not really pointed out here, that unlike the copper golems, these guys have less units, or less physical units in their roster, which means they actually perform longer better, because if they get hurt, it takes longer for one of their units to perish. It's a little bit of a weird thing, but it is worth noting that they are in that regard more powerful than their copper ones. The Iron Golem is your backline supporter, and his main job is to sit in the middle of your army cluster and spam protective wall. In all honesty, they don't serve much more purpose. They are also good in as standing in the way of people, and they also are really good at sieging cities. That's really powerful about them. But seriously, don't try to deal damage with them, and they are, well, in a 3-banner stack, 2 of them are enough. You don't need a shield in every banner. They need to be positioned where the fire is hitting hard, and one guy in the middle can buff a lot of people. You don't need 3 or more of these. It would be not wise to invest too hard into these, because they are really not as performant in damage as the rest of your build. Then I selected the wrong city. We have the Dragoons, which are in every purpose better than the Harriers. If you want to subdue enemies still, keep the Harriers, or choose to use spells for the immobilization, or pick up any other unit of the Rally of the Leash, or by capturing a city. There's plenty of options, but if you are out for damage performance, the Dragoon is just much better than the Harrier. And with this build, I rarely used Subdue too much, because I was more like turtling up and beating them down with that. So the Dragoons are really powerful, since they can distract a enemy from afar, which opens them up for flanking attacks, which is again a lot more damage than from your frontliners. And they also have the hit and run trait. What was it called again? Master Skirmisher. So if the enemy is foolish enough to have a small squishy cluster somewhere, these guys can go and get them. I really recommend to have at least 3 of them in some way, if you can afford them. They're quite costly, but they are a gold worth investing towards too. The Mage Lock Cannon, I would recommend to have 1 or 2, tops, because they are really just that nice. They are guaranteed hitting, and they can take down city defenses, and they just well, I personally see them as a very worthy replacement for a Mage Lock or 2, because yes, they cannot mark anymore, but they deal a lot of damage in return, and they are really good investment for your war spoils. Now, I want to talk about the heroes here while we're talking about military, and I noticed that you got a lot of powerful golem traits here, so I went, of course, with Golem Assistant and Experienced Warsmith. Every one of your people should try to have that, and Experienced Later is really good to have. I don't say you should have it on every one of your heroes, but it's really worth putting your copper golems under the banner of the person who has these, because they evolve faster into bronze golems. This is really, really nice. And apart from that, Mock Target is one thing that I strongly recommend to have, because it's a free action, and it's, again, a 10% increase of damage on one target. It's just that, and it's making it so much easier to focus out priority targets. Restore is also something that I like to have on every one of my heroes, because it is a negative status purge. It's more about the status purge and less about the healing, although the healing is used by me quite a lot too. But it's really, the status purge is so good. This build has nearly no status removal, therefore it's really good to have. And if you go into the support chain, you of course can pick up Spur to Action, which I personally love to have. The rest is up to flavor. I just wanted to stress out how good Experienced Leader is for this build. Now, the signature skills, it's the usual suspects. Summons are really good, and the Golem Assistant is also in the same thing, and Mass Rejuvenation and the usual things apply. There's no special thing that I noticed here in between. I also want to point out here that the spamminess of your build lies in summoning lots of copper golems or zealots, whatever you want to have. I personally preferred copper golems. This is your roster you're going to work with, and it is really, really nice to have. I want to talk about the strategy here. So this build is sort of a late bloomer. It is lots of slower, or no, it's a lot slower than my usual builds, but it's getting saved by the Reaver's early powerful game, and you basically have a weak spot between the transition of two tier 1 tomes to to the first tier 2 tomes. So your endeavors should be expanding into a second city and clearing out the environments here. Worked out on brutal difficulty really decently. The only thing that I didn't accomplish as quick as I usually do was overrunning a neutral city to pick up a third city there. So this is something where you probably should wait until your first tier 2 tome. Focus into mana generation, knowledge generation, and gold in that order. I really cannot stress out enough how important mana is. One really powerful trick of your build is that you can just spit out stupidly huge amounts of stacks of units that you can just send out to die. You only need 30 mana for a copper golem. You don't need to invest more. And then you just send them over there and let them go in auto-resolve if you're lazy. You can also summon 3 stacks of them and nuke them like that. Either way, you can get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of mana. And the rest of the gold that you might have left over is good spent in the golems there. So your economy will be focused mostly around optimizing gold and mana. Knowledge is very important too, so try to fit that in as well as you can in between. I personally solve that issue mostly by choosing province improvements that give me that, here like research posts, or focusing into wonders that have that have a knowledge income or something like that. It's really important that you don't get behind in knowledge, because you are also very research heavy, and that's something the Reavers can't really mitigate well. But as with all theme builds, it is, like I said, not as performant as. But come on, I was able to beat Brutal quite, I wouldn't say easily. There were some battles that I needed to re-roll, especially when you're facing bursty enemies. Before you have your tier 3 resilience, dark enemies and burst heavy enemies are the worst. So you really gotta pay attention to these. We are really weak on crowd control. The Harriers are all the crowd control you got, but the really important thing that I want to stress out is don't be shy from letting copper golems die, and don't be shy to fill up your early game all the way with copper golems. You can really just churn out your banners and fill them up with copper golems. Look what I did here. It's mostly copper golems all the way, or by now evolved ones. And it doesn't hurt if they get lost. Due to our cultural trait, we can spit out as many as we want to, and therefore it's really the throwaway unit of the early game, and then you mitigate into the golem assistance and these things. But what's important is keep a good hold on your backliners. These are the most important things to keep. Don't lose your supporters. It's not important if you lose frontliners. They are always replaceable, but your backliners are where it hurts. Basically, your ideal course of action is to try to always lose only things that you can easily resummon on the fly. That's where your golems and the zealots come in. That's that. End of the story. I hope you enjoyed this build, and I'm going to go for a different golem interpretation with the Industrious one day, because I feel like, come on, we need to build a golem build for the Industrious, but I felt like the Reavers were surprisingly well fit, especially since their whole build path includes already constructs, so you get a lot of cool synergy there. It's just a little bit hard to transition from the early game into the mid game, at least on Brutal it was. I think on hard difficulty it wouldn't be that hard, in all honesty. Alright, leave me your comments. I'm all eager to hear what you guys say, and feel free to leave a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and of course I want to thank the supporters of the channel. Check out Patreon, PayPal, and Buy Me a Coffee. They are the topmost links there if you want to join on in as well. But most importantly, take my thanks for watching this video up until the very end. I deeply appreciate that. So, I hope you have a wonderful day, and see you soon.